Hello everyone, it's Hooves of Doom, and I'm coming back to you for another video here. It's been a little while, um, but this is a topic that's come up a few times. It's always one of those contentious kind of issues that seem to come up, and people aren't quite sure what to do with it. Um, and what I'm going to be talking about is Elf or Aelf, the spelling of what used to be the Elf factions in Warhammer as Aelf, and it kind of throws a wrench into what people, a lot of these new faction names take a little bit of time for people to adjust. I really don't think they're that big of an issue. A year or two from now, no one's really going to care whatsoever. But right now, it's a little bit awkward. It's one of those things that you do hear a lot of conflicting information about of how to pronounce it. Is the A spoken? Is it silent? Etc. Now, just a little bit of a caveat, I guess. I'm not like a linguistic expert. I've taken a number of years of Latin and Greek, and I've been working on French and German and a few other languages. But I would no way claim to be a linguistic expert. This is just something that I've kind of do in my spare time, and I've done a little bit of research into this, and I'm going to present this as best as I can. But if you're far more knowledgeable than me, and you can point out where I'm going wrong, please do jump in. So it's a little bit similar to a demon versus demon video that I did. Demon spelled Daemon and demon spelled Demon. It's that type of video where I'm going to go and look at the linguistics and try to figure out what is really going on here. So Warhammer Age of Sigmar is really going back to the classical roots. They're really looking back at like the archaic way of spelling things, right? They want to, I don't necessarily think it has to do much of IP, but they definitely want to make sure that the Age of Sigmar factions are distinctly Age of Sigmar in terms of how they're spelling, in terms of how they look. And to some extent, this type of archaic spelling is very much what goes on in 40k, where a lot of words become, they call it High Gothic, and it's really just a version of a Pig Latin. Pig Latin is essentially words that look like Latin, but don't actually, they don't really work as Latin words. They don't have actual Latin grammar, and they don't actually mean anything necessarily, although a few do. And to some extent, that is going on even in Age of Sigmar, where the Stormcast names, they have their mundane name before their Stormcast, and then when they get reforged, they take on kind of a Latinized version of their name. So the spelling of Elf as Aelf is a similar move by GW to kind of reflect an older archaic spelling. Now, this is a post from Facebook, which was rather amusing, and a friend of the channel posted in the Warhammer Age of Sigmar Facebook, and he asked, how do you guys pronounce Aelf? Is the A silent? And there's lots of times where I probably should just keep my mouth shut, and maybe I shouldn't jump in on conversations that don't directly involve me. But that's not what I did this time. And I hopped on and I immediately said, well, it depends if the AE represents an ash in Old English. In that case, it should be pronounced as a soft A. And it's kind of the same as basically how it would be pronounced in English, although there's some differences as I'm going to show you. But that it should be pronounced as one syllable. And then I made a joke about how I make a video. Now, what I thought was great about this is the Age of Sigmar Facebook got back in response to Tyler, and he said, "This is a far better answer than we would have given what he said." So I had a good laugh at that. And the post went on a bit more. There was some posts by a few other friends of the channel as well, and I went into a little bit more detail further in. And this is kind of a video of that conversation. Frankly, I don't think the Age of Sigmar group really cares how you pronounce it as long as you're buying their models and playing their game. And frankly, they're like most people. They don't necessarily have a good grasp of English grammar or the history of the language to necessarily make that type of authoritative judgment. However you want to pronounce it is really okay. But for those that are interested, this is kind of a more in-depth look at it. So one of the things that you're probably familiar with is the spelling of traditional elf and elves as a plural. Now I'm not going to go into this too much, but the spelling as that has commonly been known has been around for some time. We traditionally use the plural elves, largely because Tolkien. It existed before. As a plural, you could also use the word elves, but that's largely not very common today. Although some people still kind of throw it out every now and then. But Tolkien kind of popularized that spelling, and obviously a lot of our conception of what an elf is, was pioneered through Tolkien to some extent. And I love this little chart here that just shows all the different elves in the Tolkien world. And I would just, as a note to the people that might be interested in 40K, you see Eldar at the top there. Eldar is one of the principal groups of the elves in Tolkien, and it means people of the stars. So where do we get the spelling of elf and the spelling of Aelf? Comes from the German roots of English. So here's a map of early England. This would be about the 6th or 7th century. Well, probably a little bit later as well. But the idea is the Romans abandoned the province of England, and shortly thereafter the island was invaded by the Angles and the Saxons. These are two German groups that came across from northern Europe and took over much of the island. So the original inhabitants of England are the Celts, as far as we can tell, and they were displaced by the Romans, and they were displaced by the Anglo-Saxons. The Celts are in blue on the map, and they still have roots today in Wales and Scotland and Ireland. But the principal foundation of English is these Angles and the Saxons. So you still see some of the Celtic languages in the form of a Gaelic, for instance. But so English as a language has this kind of German undertone that comes in and takes control. And at its very root, it's really a type of German language. And then in 1066, when William the Conqueror from the Normans invaded and took over England, they spoke basically French, and French as a Romance language has a lot of elements of Latin and a few kind of transplant words from Greek. So there's a lot of complexity there. And anyone that spoke, so for instance, Old English, if they wanted to become part of the social hierarchy after 1066, they had to kind of adopt these other linguistic elements. And so the two languages, essentially the Old German and then this French and Latin and Greek, they became kind of infused into this weird mixed match of a language, which is what we have today. So if you watch like the Vikings on the History Channel, and they are obviously the Vikings are talking amongst themselves and they have their own language. But if they're in England and they're speaking amongst themselves, it's their own language as well. So this old German is this Old English. And when people talk about Old English today, they're often talking about like reading Shakespeare or something like that. But truly old English is virtually impossible for the modern reader to read, because it's really a completely different language. So this is that time when we get the spelling Aelf for the word elf, and basically what it is there's no differentiation between the A and the E. It's a single letter based upon a rune, which is from the German language, and that single letter is referred to as an ash. So here on this chart, you can see the transition that created the elf and the ash in the modern context. And like I said, there's still some kind of go, between some. In some instances, it's spelt a little bit more closely to how we would recognize it. In others, it's not. But the final result is kind of this dual A-E-L-F a spelling. And it's interesting because even then, the idea of one of these elves really has significance as a type of mystical being. A lot of monarchs in Anglo-Saxon society, for instance, had Aelf or Aelf at the beginning of their name. So words like Alfred, for instance, would be spelled Aelf dead or Red. And like I said, that AE in some sense shouldn't be thought about as being AE. It's a single letter. It has a single sound. So how does this work in practice? How should an ash be pronounced? Well, it conventionally would be pronounced as a short A. Now, there are 3 different types of or ways to pronounce an A: as long as an able, great, or late; short as an at, cat, or bat; or soft as in father, lawn, tot, ant. The soft is the soft A is how an ash would be pronounced. So this would be like a very soft Aelf. But clearly, there's reasons why people wouldn't want to pronounce, these the new elf factions as elves. It doesn't quite sound the way we want it to sound. The basic problem is that vowel combinations are very complicated when it comes to how they're pronounced, because they don't follow a lot of specific rules, and when you combine vowels together, they often form completely different sounds, or they favor one vowel over the other. And how you determine what vowel gets the preference or what sound it makes can vary pretty drastically, even within English, which is mixed up of many different language roots. In, say, Latin, for instance, the AE combination is pronounced as I, so that demon, as we Daemon in Latin and Greek, is pronounced as a daimon. Now, that's not how we would want to pronounce it, and you don't want to pronounce it as the conventional. See, when you have 2 vowels, there's often a rule that people use, and it's something that I tend to kind of go to as well. It's what my wife always is talking about when she comes to pronunciation, and that is that you stress the first vowel and the second vowel is not spoken; it's silent. And in some, for example, if you reverse it and it's ea, for example, in the word eat, the a is silent, and that in many instances in the EA vowel combination, that is exactly how it works. The AE vowel combination, however, breaks a lot of that. Most of the time, that is not how it's pronounced. There are many words that have the AE vowel combination where the E is the one that is pronounced, and it'd be a hard E. So that's not that great, right? So you're left with basically, because of this mix of different linguistic roots and the hard E as in used in the AE combination. As far as I can tell, that's more of like from the Greek root, um, more associated with words that could come from Greek than anything else. But there's quite a bit of them. Um, and so you're left with basically three ways to pronounce this word if you associate the A and the E as hearkening back to an ash, and you want to pronounce it as an ash, then it's more like an Aelf. If you want to use the conventional way of pronouncing uh, vowels in that sense, you'd be more like an Aelf. But as I said, there are so many exceptions to that Aelf is actually a decent way to do it. Um, and that makes it very annoying, because I don't think there is necessarily a fully um, pure, great linguistic way of doing it. If you're looking at what the fluff writers intended, then I think you are dealing with an ash. But I don't think Alf is really what people want to hear or use. But frankly, I don't think Eelf is either. Um, I would probably go probably with Aelf, simply because I think that's the easiest one for us to um, adopt. I think it's the most palatable of in some sense. But I honestly, when I first started this, I thought I would be able to come up with an easier way to legitimately argue for one spelling or maybe two over. And frankly, even in the last hour, I realized that there is the third Eolf, um, because I was going on that rule that the A is pronounced over the E. But frankly, there are, in fact, a number of words that used to be spelt with AE, like archaeology, that are now, you do pronunciate the E, and the A has actually been omitted. So there's no real great way to do it. I'm a little bit perplexed myself. So I guess you'll just have to determine what works for you and go from there. As I said, I would lean towards the fact that the fluff writers are drawing upon Old English, but I don't like how the ash would be pronounced either. So, yeah. So, and you mean conventionally you could say, well, the you place emphasis on the E and the A is silent, and you pronounce it as a softer short E, and so it is, as we've always known it, as elf. Um, but that isn't usually how, for example, in the word demon, it's E, it's demon, so it'd be Eelf. Um, but I don't know. Anyways, guys, I think I just muddied the water far more. Um, but maybe, hopefully, you found this to be somewhat interesting, and maybe I'll keep rooting around and see if I can come up with something a little bit more clear. But I don't know. Interesting. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening, and have a good one.